We're going to try to get things going here. It's a very exciting night. Welcome to AVA Gallery and Art Center. I'm Trip Anderson, the executive director here. I'm not a storyteller. That's one of my worst capabilities. I'm a visual artist. But we're thrilled to have you all here. This crowd continues to astound us that we keep selling out earlier and earlier. That's a wonderful problem to have, but we do think it's a challenge, and we're trying to do something about it. You may hear more about that in the future. But before we get going, I just have a few housekeeping things to do. First of all, let's hear a big round of applause for our music entertainment tonight, Never Too Late. They have a tip jar out and graciously accept tips. Let's also thank Pawn, who may actually be able to hear us tonight, for serving such wonderful food to everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. And a very special thanks to our storytelling committee at AVA that puts this whole show together once every 3 months, once every quarter. I know they're here. Judith over there. Mike. Cheryl's around somewhere. I don't see her at the moment. And Leanne. Thank you all for... And Sally Bacon, who's not here tonight, but Sally is definitely part of the team, and they work very, very hard between sessions to get everybody ready for all these shows. Again, thank you so much. Tonight we have a wonderful lineup from what I understand. We also have 2 TV crews here tonight, so we're being filmed. We have CBS in the back of the room who's doing a show on Vermont storytellers, and we have CATV over here. So thank you for the crews for not tripping over each other and finding space to do your thing tonight. A couple other housekeeping notes. Part of tonight's show, we will be raffling off an opportunity for you, the audience, someone from the audience, to tell your own 5-minute story. So if you're feeling brave, there is a basket just outside the door. Enter your name in that basket, and right after intermission, we'll pick a name, and you'll be the first up for the second half to tell your own story. We will also be raffling off tonight 2 pairs of 2 tickets to next June's Mudroom, I think it is, in the rotation, and we'll also be raffling off an AVA membership. So several opportunities to win something just after intermission. Without further ado, though, because you're not here to listen to me talk, I'm going to introduce Mike Lovell, who will introduce all the storytellers for the first half of the show. Mike.
Our first storyteller is Penny Bennett. Penny came from England, but she's now a local artist. And somewhere in the room, there are a few copies of Penny's first painting. And they're circulating around. She did it when, there it is right there, you can hold it up. She did the painting when she was 4 years old, and it's significant to her story. And it's, she is the bravest of the storytellers, and she asked to go first.
Actually, the reason I asked to go first was because if I had to wait until the end, I would have all that time to worry. And I am very shy. Okay, let me see if I can do it. I'm not sure. I was born just before the Second World War in London, England. And soon after I was born, of course, the bombing started. Of course, I was too young to be aware of what was happening. But later, when it swallowed up London, I was aware. And all of my young years were lived under war circumstances. Let me see if I can relax a bit more. Thank you. Shall I get closer? Oh, all right.
We want to hear you.
I didn't want to be uncouth, so I was not talking very loud. The thing is that my early years were lived in wartime circumstances, and the main thing that you aim for when you're in that circumstance is some kind of normal life. And so my mother kept my sister and I, who was 2 years older, she kept us busy drawing because there were no toys in the stores and there was no money to buy those toys. So she kept us busy drawing, and the ones that are circling around the audience, I did when I was 4. And I became aware of it some time ago when my mother passed on. Actually, it was more than some time. And I was the one who went through her belongings, and I found this drawing. And I realized that for the first time, art was the thing that I would do to express my grievances in life. And there were plenty of them. Later, when one tries to live a normal life, even in wartime, and people have to go to their jobs, children have to go to school, and I was 2.5 years younger than my sister. She was all dressed up in her school uniform with her satchel on her back, and I was in a pushchair. Well, what happened, we were going on the road with other people with the same mission, and suddenly a plane came down, and my mother, in less than a second, dumped me into nearby bushes, grabbed my sister and leaped into the bushes herself. I don't know what happened to the rest of the people, but we did survive. And funnily enough, my sister, who is still around and has Alzheimer's, remembers that day, and she even remembers the name of the road that we were on, the North Orbital Road. So it made an impression. What my mother had done, of course, was to keep us busy so that we were not aware of the bombing around us. Later, I realized when my mother had passed on that the center of my life had been this art, and that it was my means of making a social comment. That was the first war story. The second one is about living under the bombing and having terrible asthma, that I was totally disabled, and my family was very supportive. I'm going to have a swig. What happened is that in the war, there was no medicine. And asthma, if you've ever had it, I hope you haven't, was such an overwhelming thing. And we did have a shelter, like our neighbors. Everybody had been given shelters, but we didn't use ours because my family was so supportive of me that what they did is we stayed in the house essentially under the bombing, and so that I could stay propped up in bed instead of in a damp, nasty shelter that would have brought on a huge asthma attack. So essentially, we lived through the war with the bombing all around us. I should mention that my father had moved us out of central London because it was just so frightening and dangerous. But what happened is he had neglected to do the research, and it turned out that where he moved us to, which was presumably a leafy suburb of London, in fact, had a major RAF air base. And every night, the Spitfires, I'm remembering that name, the Spitfires would go up and they would bomb occupied Europe, and an equal number would go up and they would be circling round in the night sky over London. So it was a sort of traumatic childhood. The thing is, my sister and I kept drawing. Now, where am I in my story? Well, obviously, I survived the war, and we didn't get bombed, but I think the thing that really did it was having very supportive parents. Oh, I just remembered what I wanted to say. There was one incident that happened where we had a close call. My father was a fire warden, so he wasn't home at night, and he was a fireman during the day. And one night it was extremely noisy, and of course my sister and I slept through it, but my mother, of course, was alone and didn't. And when we woke up in the morning, we noticed there was a stain in the plaster above my sister's bed. So my father came home, and he went up to see if he could fix it. And of course, there was a large piece of rubble from an air fight that could have gone right through the roof and could have killed my sister, but it didn't. The other thing that I was aware of, and I'm certainly aware of now, is that one gets in life very anxious. And the thing is that drawing sometimes is not enough to keep you from being so anxious. And I discovered something that I could do that was very naughty, and I could get away with it. What I did, I would climb up to my mother's... Oh, by the way, I was also conscious that parents don't do this kind of thing, and therefore they don't have a relief. So I would sneak up to my mom's bedroom, and I would go behind the curtain, and I would wait until somebody was going past the house. And then, I'm going to say something rude. Then what I would do is I would yell out every vulgar word I knew. And I'm going to do that now. So be careful. Babe, bum, doo-doos, wee-wees, vest, po, knickers. And I felt so relieved. And the person, of course, turned round to look and see who was so vulgar. And of course, by then I was behind the curtain and feeling very proud of myself for being so brave. Another war story. Do I have another war story? I think I might be too nervous to come up with another one. I told the story of the... oh yes, another war story. This really, well, they all happened. Another war story. My mother had sent me outside because she wanted to check and see if the wash was dry. In England, at that time, people didn't have washing machines. And I remember we had something called a mangle that you would get the water out of the clothing. Anyway, she sent me outside to the garden to see if the clothing was dry. And there I was, and suddenly there was this tremendous roar, and this plane came right down, and I locked eyes with the pilot. And the next thing you knew, he was gone. And of course, I never told my mum. The thing is, I suppose he was on the way to the Hendon airport to bomb it, and I wasn't worth using some ammunition on. But that was just a very strange moment. So I did speak about realizing how important it was, my personal survival emotionally, by doing art. And at some point, I am a full-time artist. I have done it my whole life. I actually, this is not self-promotion, I actually have murals in New York, graphic murals, unless somebody's stolen them, which could be. But everything started back then with that little drawing. And I would recommend anybody to take up art because it saves you from doing worse things. Was it all right?
It was great. It was great. It was great.
I'm so shy, though. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. There we go. I'm very awful.
And those are no longer the 7 words that you're not allowed to say at your mother.
Okay. Does that mean I don't have to talk into the microphone?
No, this is pretty.
Once again,
That's for the room.
For the what? For the
at
room?
intermission,
So if I
we're going to
miss
pick
it,
a
it's not gonna
name
mess
out of
you
a
up?
hat, so you
If I
kind of see
miss
what you
this one,
get
it's
to
not gonna
come
mess
up
you
and
up?
do. It's a really
Okay.
exhilarating
This is
thing.
the-
Tell your
this is
story.
the-
We're just going to pick
this
a
is
name.
for
You're
the
going to
teacher.
just, whoever it is,
He's
you're just going to
talking to
stand
the
up
teacher.
Okay.
and tell your story. It seems very exciting.
Wait, 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 yeah.
Our second storyteller right now
Make sure the
is
antennas are
Beth Crowe, and she has a story about an experience that probably was a little more scary than this will be for her. So, Beth Crowe.
Good evening. That remains to be seen. So about 2 years ago, I came across a journal that I had written when I was 13. On the very last page, the journal said, "When I grow up, I'm going to California and I'm going to become a movie star." And now, I'm late, really late. I should have left the house at 10. It's 10:45. I am really, really late. Why is it when you're late that the person in front of you is the slowest driver that you've ever seen? Please, will you move it, Granny? Okay, calm down. Calm down, you're almost there. Oh, I can't park on the right side in front of the town hall. Oh, okay, I'll take this right. I'll go around the green. I'll just pull a U-turn and park in front of the town hall, right in front of the policeman, with his lights flashing. He walks over to the window, which I roll down. "Good morning." "Good morning, officer. Did I do something wrong?" "This is a one-way street." "I know that, but it's farther down, it's a one-way street. I have an audition, you know, for a musical, Cats, Dancing Cats. I'm really late, and license and registration, ma'am." As he went back to check my license and registration, I suddenly realized I wasn't quite so nervous anymore. I mean, after all, I was 60 years old. This was my first audition. Maybe they would turn me away. I had no business being here anyway. The policeman came back to my door. "Have a good day, ma'am. Good luck with your audition." "Thanks. That's the beauty of a small town. Even the policemen know there's an audition today." I grabbed my stuff, my bag and my water and my sheet music and my shoes, and I headed up the big stairs into the town hall lobby, where I found several others waiting. 11-year-old others with little buns, tiny feet, big smiles, and their mothers. A harried lady appeared from behind a desk and handed us all a sheaf of papers. Fill this out to the best of your ability. I looked down at my paper. Name, check. Address, check. Age, really? Check. Telephone number. I don't call my cell phone. I don't always remember my cell phone number. Okay. Theatrical experience. Theatrical experience. I peeked over at the 11-year-olds to see their mothers furiously writing on the pieces of paper. I used to sing Sound of Music in my room. That counts, right? Sound of Music. I helped my son when he was in the 7th grade prepare for Joseph. When? A long time ago. Voice. Amateur, trained, beginner, professional. Okay, well, I'm not exactly a beginner. I'm not exactly trained, but I have sung in a lot of choruses. That has to count, right? I checked both amateur, beginner, and trained. Next category. Dance. I should say none. I really, really should say none. But when I was in my 20s, I used to teach Jackie Sorensen aerobics. It was dance. It had music. I checked some. The harried lady, oh, sorry, there was one more part. It asked me what part I wanted in this play. First choice. I chose Gus. He's old and he doesn't dance much. Second choice, the Gumby cat. She's fat and she doesn't dance much. I left third, fourth, and fifth blank. Would you take a male part? Yes, I'll take a male part. Would you be an understudy? Yes, I'll be an understudy. Would you be in the chorus? Please, God. The harried lady returns back from her desk and gathers up our papers and tells us to go into the theater and get up on the stage and be prepared for a dance sequence. A dance sequence? I read the audition thing. It said, prepare 32 bars of upbeat music. It said, bring sheet music. It said, be prepared to do a dance sequence after. I know it said after. I head with the 11-year-olds into the theater where I am relieved to find that there are other people already there. Not all 11-year-olds. I climb up onto the big stage where people are stretching and getting themselves ready for dance. And it's big. It's really big. And the lights are really bright. And the good thing about a stage is when the lights are really bright, you can't see a thing. It's great. And I'm stretching and thinking, oh, I'm looking around. There are all kinds of people here. Onto the stage walks the director. Good morning, ladies. She gives me a long biography of her past experiences. Then she says to us, form 3 lines. This is Broadway choreography. 1, 2, 3, go. Walk, walk, walk. Leap, turn, lunge, arch, claws. Huh? I'm a little bit stuck on the Broadway choreography part. Again, center stage, ready. Walk, 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 leap, turn, lunge, arch, claws. Ladies, we are not elephants. We are cats. Claws. Back row, other left. Try to sing the words. That will help. I don't even know the song. The 11-year-olds have got it great. So I position myself somewhere close behind them so I have something to watch. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4. Leap, turn, lunge, arch, claws. Hey, I got it that time. Again. Not this time. Again. Maybe that time. I suddenly think, this is actually kind of fun. I know I look like a klutz right now, but I bet I could get it. If you gave me enough time, I bet I could get it. Okay, thank you very much. Please go back to the lobby. We'll call you in one by one for singing. Okay, down the stage, back into the lobby, and I realized, you know, maybe dancing first wasn't such a bad idea. I mean, I'm not as nervous about the singing, that's for sure. So I sit in the lobby and I wait my turn, and when it comes, I grab my sheet music and head back onto the stage, where I climb up and go over to the piano player with my sheet music. And then I have to confess. Hi, Josh. I sing this song all the time. I've been singing it since my kids were really babies, but I've actually never heard the sheet music. I don't have a piano, and Josh just smiles. I have a feeling he's kind of heard it all before. He says to me, "Don't worry, I can follow whatever you do." I said, "Great, I want to do the first verse, and I want to do the chorus at the end." I hand in my sheet music, and I return to the stage, center stage, where fortunately I can't see anything. 1, 2, 3, 4. Josh counts me in. Oh, it's time to start living, time to take a little from this world we're given. I'm doing it. I am singing on a stage in front of people, and my voice only wobbles when I remember that I'm on stage singing in front of people. Just no time at all. Dun-dun-dun. I did it. I did it. The director speaks up. "Josh, you need to range her," which is basically doing la-la-las up a scale, just like chorus. She asked me about my availability. She asked me if I would be willing to do a box part. With my new bravado, I asked her, "What is a box part?" When she tells me that a box part is people that sing off stage to have their voices support the people that are dancing. "Sure," I said, "sounds like chorus to me. I can do that." She says, "Okay, thank you very much. We'll call." I'm not paying attention to her anymore. I have started walking out of the rehearsal hall. It's enough. I did it. It's enough. When I get to the lobby, I give the 11-year-olds a thumbs up. They look pretty nervous with their sheet music clutched in their hands. And I head on out into the winter sunshine. I didn't get the part. Maybe my cell phone number was wrong. But 4 months later, I tried out for Christmas Revels, and I got in. Much bigger stage. Thank you.
So we do a little get-together, all the storytellers, in the week before the event, so they can try out their story and give each other feedback. And I don't think we got as much singing a few nights ago. So that was great. Our next storyteller is Sue Lee, and she says she gets a lot of her storytelling material from her outdoor adventures and from her interesting family and friends. And in 30 seconds of talking to her just a little while ago, she told me about a backcountry ski trip up and down Mount Kearsarge and a backpacking bike trip to Alaska that she's going on pretty soon. So she's pretty adventurous. So Sue Lee.
Thank you. Well, this is an interesting family story. I was 9 when my father remarried, and so the 5 Lees and the 4 Veeks all joined together and moved into a large, rather grand house. The 3 Veek kids were older, and so soon enough they were off to college. So we 4 Lees were left under the tutelage of my stepmother, Elaine, who we called Ellie. So despite her rather modest, or maybe in spite of her modest background, Ellie aspired to be on the social register, which was this list of people who were renowned and wealthy, and white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who belonged to all the best clubs, went to the best schools, and they had good names. In Ellie's world, you were either somebody or nobody. And I often heard her say things like, "Oh, she's such a nobody." So she was determined to have us be somebodies. And she was especially focused on we three girls learning all of the social graces so that we could become appropriate mates for men of stature. This was a pretty tall order because two of us did not really fit the young lady bill. My sister hated wearing dresses, and I loved hunting bugs and catching frogs. So we were sent off to Miss Covington's dance school, where we learned how to sit with our ankles crossed and our hands in our lap. And we learned how to shake hands properly. Ladies, present, but never squeeze. So of course we learned how to ballroom dance, we learned the waltz, and we learned the foxtrot, and we learned the tango, which later in life I really appreciated, but at the time having to hold hands with sweaty preteen boys was quite despicable. So dinner at our house, when it was in the dining room, was quite a formal affair. We had to dress for dinner, and we had to exhibit our best manners, which meant no elbows on the table and napkins in the lap. We sat up straight, and as always, children were to be seen but not heard, so you only spoke when spoken to. And the conversation was always very nice and polite. And we ate things like beef remoulade, which was these little turds of beef wrapped around rice, tied with a string. We had peeled asparagus with lobster tails served with clarified butter, but never, ever margarine. And then there was tomato aspic, St. Anthony's aspic, which was this wriggling salmon-colored tomato gelatin mold that contained cottage cheese and tuna fish, served with a dollop of mayonnaise. We thought this was disgusting. Ellie thought it was divine. So one afternoon, Ellie gave Gigi and myself a lesson in how to properly set a formal table with multiple forks and knives and spoons and plates and glasses. So we start with a fork. There's a salad fork, there's a fish fork, and there's a dinner fork. We didn't say anything at the time, but in the recap, we looked at each other and we said, "Fish forks." And we proceeded to write a song that was called, "What is a fish fork for?" It was a hit. So I'm not sure that we ever actually used these forks, but I was fascinated with their specificity. They were medium-sized forks with 3 tines, and the lower tine had a little hook on it that was used to delicately dig out the pin bones from a piece of fish. So my stepmother loved movies, and she especially loved the classic dramatic romances and musicals where the men wore smoking jackets and the women wore flowing gowns and sparkling jewels, and there were formal dinners and elegant balls, and everything was darling and marvelous. So I was home from college one semester. I had a semester off. I was the only kid at home. And one night, Ellie said to my father and myself, she said, "Let's rent a movie tonight." And I'm thinking, great, I'm thinking maybe we'll watch one of those classics. And then she says, I've never seen an X-rated movie. My father's disappeared, and I'm left holding the bag. So, sure. So it's 1979, and X-rated movies, at this time, it was a gamut. There were a couple of films that had shown in mainstream theaters that were X-rated, and it was called Porn with a Plot, or Porn Chic. And it was like Deep Throat and The Devil in Miss Jones. But then there were also films that got the X rating because they had nudity, or there was, more than suggestive sex or vulgar language or, bloody violence. So I wasn't quite sure what Ellie was expecting or what she was wanting to see. I suspect it was the porn with a plot. But when we look at the sheet of the list of movies from the video store, and go to the back page where the adult selection was, fortunately, Deep Throat or The Devil and Miss Jones was not on the list. But Ellie first comes to A Clockwork Orange, which I had actually seen. It's brutal, violent. I nixed that one. But then she comes to Last Tango in Paris. And I didn't really know much about it. You've all seen it. But I did know there was something controversial about it. And that's all I could tell her. And she said, well, she goes, the tango is a very sexy dance. And Paris is a marvelously romantic city. Let's watch that one. So while Ellie pops the popcorn, I go to the video store. I'm shy, I'm 20, I'm red in the face while I get this film. On the 5-minute drive home, I'm wondering if this is a good idea. But I get home, we put the film in. It starts with this incredible, jazzy, great saxophone music. And in the opening scene, you see Marlon Brando looking very despondent, walking down the road underneath a railroad trestle. So we find out that he is a middle-aged American living in Paris. He owns a hotel. And we later find out that his wife has just committed suicide. But he's on his way to rent an apartment. Also looking at this apartment is this beautiful, very, very young Parisian woman. She's got a funky hat on. She's got this white coat with white fur. And the two of them, they dance around each other a little bit. Who's going to get the apartment? And before you know it, he's kissing her, he's ripped off her underwear, and they're rolling around on the floor having sex. And they proceed to have this very sordid, strange relationship, if you'll call it that. And she's spunky, and she wants to have some power, but he always has control. They are not allowed to speak each other's names. In fact, they're not allowed to speak anyone's names. So this whole thing is this completely anonymous, nameless affair. So the film goes on. It's very dark. It's very close. And in fact, we then get to see a woman cleaning up a very bloody bathroom, the scene of his wife's suicide. And we also get to see just how deranged Marlon Brando's character is. So we're watching this, and as I grab popcorn, I'm taking peeks at Ellie, just to make sure she's doing okay, and she's sitting upright and she's watching intently, and I can't read. I can't tell if she's disapproving or whatever. So, we eventually get to the middle of the film, which is the controversial scene. And for the US audience, it had actually been pared down. But it was quite clear that he was forcibly sodomizing her with the aid of some butter. So we haven't spoken a word through this hour of viewing, but at the end of that scene, Ellie asked, was that butter that he used? So I said, yes. And she said, oh, well, I've heard that margarine is better. So I'm pretty sure that Ellie didn't watch the whole film. And we never talked about it. I think she told my father it was interesting, because that's the polite thing you say when you don't know what to say. But I do know that that was the first and the last time that we watched an X-rated movie together. All of the rest were classics, and they were darling and marvelous. Thank you.
The theme that inspired all of our storytellers tonight is the first time. So our storytellers are telling stories that came to them when they were thinking about the first time they did something.
Raffle off who our storyteller from the audience is going to be. So I will hold this basket high.
And our lucky brave storyteller from the audience is George Spencer. So George, just hold on 1 second because we're going to have a raffle and then we'll mic you up and then you'll come on up. So folks, don't forget that we're thinking that we'd like to make this spontaneous audience participation a regular part of Mudroom. We did it last month and we're trying it tonight. And even though we do have a little bit of a rehearsal for people who told, it's not like that. You can just come right up and tell your story. So after the raffle, we'll have George.
Okay, a few more things to raffle, and Judith, you're going to pick these. These will be for 2 tickets to the next Mudroom in June.
And I don't think everybody put in their name.
It's low odds this time around.
Okay, so this is for 2 tickets?
2 tickets.
And the name is Mark Gilbert.
Let me take that. That was a hit, I think.
And
2 more tickets to Mudroom.
tickets. And those 2 tickets go to, what do you think it says here? Something Godfrey.
Mike Goffrey? No.
I see an M. I see a K. And I don't know what's in the middle. Anyone? Maybe it's Godbray? There's no phone number. There's only a name. What do you say?
I see McGoffrey.
Oh, McGoffrey?
No? Shall we pick another?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very important. And Ella Martin.
2 tickets. And now 1 more for a individual membership to AVA.
And that name is Jennifer
Hertog.
Yes. Thank you. You're keeping those?
I will,
Don't lose
I will keep those. I will now turn the mic over to Judith, who will introduce our story. Oh, 1 more bit.
No, that is our storyteller.
That's right.
Yes.
One more thing. This bag was left in the members gallery. If anybody recognizes it, I'll have it over here in the corner. I have a winner.
And as our storyteller makes his way up here, I forgot your name, I'm sorry. George. I just wanted to encourage everybody not to be shy about telling stories, because everybody has stories. And yes, it is scary to stand up in front of an audience, but you don't have to be an extrovert. You don't have to be... Everybody can tell a story. And please submit stories also for our next Mudroom. The theme will be The Longest Day. Our next Mudroom is June 14th or 15th? 14th, Thursday. It's a Thursday in the middle of June. And please send us an email with your story ideas. And we are looking for storytellers. George.
Thank you.
Thank you for...
Thank you, Sue. Good evening, Lebanon, New Hampshire. I moved up here 2.5 months ago from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and if this doesn't go well, I may have to leave town. So this is a story about the first time that something happened in an ancient walled city in Tunisia but with the California twist. So picture yourself back in the golden era of 1980. I had gone junior year abroad to the American University in Cairo, flew over on TWA on the same plane with the Grateful Dead's roadies who gave 3 shows a week later in Cairo at the pyramids. You wouldn't have believed it. Lunar eclipse, second set, third night, it was outrageous. Sadat came back from Camp David the same time. The police were whipping people with their belts in Tahrir Square to keep them cool. Do a junior year abroad there, it's wonderful. And then I get a job, I go back to Duke. I'm collecting colleges, I moved up from Chapel Hill, I went to Duke, now I'm at Dartmouth. So after I get out of Duke, what do? I get a great job, Duke University Education. I go to work for the Arab News newspaper in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I go to work for, in a totalitarian state. That lasted 89 days. I managed to get the newspaper shut down. I got the Minister of the Interior so angry, he called the newspaper and shut it down. But that's a story for another time. So I'm going back home, and I stop in Cairo to see my friend Tim. Tim's like 6'2", tall Texan guy, and I'm on my way home. I've lost my job. What am I going to do? I'm going to live with my mom. And I say, Tim, we got to do something. We got to have an adventure. And he wanted to go to Tunisia. I wanted to go there too. Never heard of it. Never. It's a thumb-shaped country wedged between Libya and Algeria. So we get on a plane. We rent a little red car, and we go driving around Tunisia. Now, has anybody here been to Tunisia? 2 people. Tunisia is one of the coolest places in the world. It's 1,200 miles of beautiful beaches, Roman ruins there that are better than in Italy. There's a Roman Colosseum in a town called Gem that's better preserved than the one in Rome. So Tim and I are having the time of our life driving around this beautiful country. We're like 21, 22 years old. And we pull into this ancient walled city, Kairouan, K-A-I-R-O-U-A-N. It's an ancient walled city. It's on the edge of the Sahara, so it's right in the middle of the country. And the town has not changed in 1,000 years. I mean, in narrow alleyways, walls all around this circular city. And we're sitting in this outside of the walls at a little tea shop having a glass of tea. And I see this big moving van parked nearby, and it says something like McGillicuddy's Theatrical Supplies. And like London, England. And I'm thinking, what in the world is this doing here? And so I asked the teenage boy who was the waiter, I say in Arabic, I said, what is this truck doing here? And he goes, oh, British company making a documentary about the desert. So my friend Tim and I are like, well, so what, big deal. So we go stay at our hovel of a hotel because we're both poor college students. Next morning we get up and we're in this little tiny alleyway that's like this wide. And Tim goes in this hole-in-the-wall shop to buy postcards. And so I'm standing, leaning against the wall, waiting for my friend to buy his postcards. And I look down this twisting alleyway, and what do I see coming at me? I see the most beautiful Arab woman I've ever seen in my life. Mind you, I grew up in Iran, I lived in Saudi Arabia, I lived in Egypt. And I see this woman, she's got raven black hair spilling down over her shoulders. She's wearing red satin harem pants with this billowy top, and she's beautiful. And what's more, she's surrounded by these 4 huge men, all in these one-piece suits with giant sashes on. They're like something out of some medieval era, and they're all marching down this alleyway. And she's fantastic. She looks like a movie star. And I realize she is a movie star. And I'm thinking, who is this? She's Brooke Adams, who was a big movie star back around 1980. And I go into this hole-in-the-wall store, and I take my friend, and I pull him out. I say, come on, there's a movie star here. We're going to follow her and see where she's going. And my friend's befuddled. He drops the postcards. And so we're very cool. We're following these processions. Oh, when they get up close to us, I can see that these swarthy Arab guys, they're not big swarthy Arab guys. They're speaking with British accents, and they've got like cork charcoal marked over their faces. And so they're like stuntmen or something. And so we follow them at a very discreet distance, going through all these snaking alleyways. And finally we turn a corner, and there's this big fat policeman leaning up against a hobby horse. He's like sleeping there. And they go right by him. And so, Tim, how are we going to get by this cop? And so we pull out our Instamatic cameras, and we say to the cop in Arabic, American reporters, American journalists. And we walk on through. And so all of a sudden, this narrow winding alleyway opens up into this huge courtyard. And we're in the middle of Hollywood. There are huge cranes. They're all just 100 American and British people milling around with cables and lights, all this stuff going on. my friend and I are looking at each other like, what in the world could this be? This is, I guess, October 1980. And we're standing there. We don't want to get kicked out because you hear these stories about people who sneak into movie sets in Hollywood and they get thrown out. So we're standing way in the back like, we don't want to get noticed. And a woman comes up to us and she says, "What are you doing here?" Because this is like middle of nowhere. We're obviously, teenage college students. "What are you doing here?" And we're like, "Oh, we're just, we're just here." And, and I say to her, "Well, what are you doing? What is this? What are you doing here?" And she says, "I'm making a movie about the movie." And that's when I go, "Oh, this is not some little documentary. She's making a movie about the movie." And I'm like, "Well, what is this?" And she says, "Well, it's a Steven Spielberg movie. It's about this archaeologist who's fighting Nazis." This archaeologist who's fighting Nazis in Egypt in the 1930s. And she says, way over there, that's Harrison Ford, and way over there, that's Karen Allen, and that's Steven Spielberg way over there across on the other side of the thing. And my friend and I are like, oh, wow. But the funny thing is, this is 1980, and this is not like Steven Spielberg was like this god that he is now. He'd only made 2 or 3 movies. And, it was a big deal, but it wasn't like the supremely gigantic thing it is now. And so we're hanging out, and my friend Tim, he eventually says to me, "Well, George, what we should do? We should forget about our plans for the day. We should stay here all day long and hang out, and maybe we can get in the movie." And I say to Tim, "Nah, this sounds really boring. Archaeologist in Egypt, 1930s. This sounds like a drag. Let's go." And so we left. And so And so that's my story. That's my first time on a Hollywood movie set, and maybe the only time. Thank you for listening.
That is a wonderful story. And again, I want to encourage everyone to tell stories. You don't even have to come here to tell stories. What I do, I just gather friends and friends of friends in my living room, and we sit around and tell stories. So yeah, go ahead and do that, and then come back and tell your stories here. Our next storyteller is Kim Christiansen, who is a local artist who has exhibited here at AVA. Please welcome Kim.
Sorry, just a second.
My story starts in Ventura, California, which is about 30 minutes below Santa Barbara, California. Santa Barbara's actually been in the news a lot lately because of the big fire they had out there. But I was in an apartment, and I was actually just about 100 yards from the beach. I gave myself a treat when I was out doing some other work, and a friend of mine had told me that if ever I wanted to use his surfboard, it was right in the back, and I could take it whenever I wanted. And I had my wetsuit and stuff because I had surfed. And this evening I went down to check the waves, and they were huge. They were pumping. The waves were really pumping. And I went into some kind of a schizophrenic split. And what I mean is, I hadn't surfed in about 40 years. I was in no physical condition whatsoever. I hadn't been doing anything to be in shape, And I looked at the waves and I thought, Rincon is a point about 20 minutes north. And Rincon Point is one of the best surf breaks on the entire California coast. And I thought, God, if I get up early in the morning, I could grab the board and my wetsuit and I could go up to Rincon and catch some waves. And it was just complete ridiculous, And I got up in the morning and got everything organized, and I drove up to Rincon. And I got there Actually, I was there about an hour or two early. It was still dark. And I had to just sleep in my car, you know, for about an hour. I just slept in my car. I set a timer on my cell phone. And, but it got light enough, and I got out of the car. I got my board. I put on my wetsuit and booties, and I walked on down to the beach. And then walked on out to the point and paddled, and I just got washed down the beach, all the way down the shore. I was way down, and finally hit the sand, and I walked all the way back to the point. And when there's two breaks, there's the one point, and then there's another point, which is the first break. And that's where the waves first hit, and they're biggest there. And that's where all the guys that are really good, that's where they surf. And then there's this point, which is still a good point, but that's where I was going to take off from the second time. And I waited and waited, and finally a lull took place, and I just paddled my butt off, and I got out beyond the break and just sat out there and just collected my energy and watched the guys take off down at the main point, and just rested for about an hour. And then a wave came, and I thought, whoa, maybe I can catch this. And so I paddled, but I was too far out to the right. And so, but another one came, and I tried to paddle it, but I was still too far out to the right. And then when I turned around to start paddling back out, I realized that I had gotten myself a little too far in. So when I was starting to paddle back out, there were a couple really big waves coming. And there was this one that was coming, major wave, and I just busted my ass. You know, oh God, I got it, and I just didn't make it. And it just crushed me. It just crushed me. And it just took me all over the place. And I had my board was strapped to my ankle. And I finally got up to the surface and pulled my board in and got on it and turned around to start paddling out. And another bigger wave than that one started coming in. And I just did everything I could to get out beyond that wave. And I didn't make it. And it crushed me. It crushed me more than I have ever been crushed. And it took me down and around, and I had no idea if my head was up or if it was down or sideways. Bubbles were coming all over the place. I was completely out of my realm, completely. I had no idea. And then finally, I got to a point where I thought I was going to die. And I just said to myself, in that split second, I said, God, I think I'm going to die. And I just want to thank you for all the joy that I've had in my life. And I just want to die with gratitude. And at the very end, I was able to pop up out of the water. My head came up, and I was able to breathe. And I was able to gather my board, and these guys who were paddling out said, dude, are you all right? You need some help, you know, because they saw me. They saw everything as they were paddling out. And I said, no, I think I'm okay. And I paddled back to shore, and when I got to the beach, I just got on my hands and knees and just said, I am never, ever going to put myself in this kind of situation again, ever. And that evening, I read in the paper that there were 6 guys down in San Diego, which is about 4 hours below, and they were getting that same bunch of waves. 6 guys drowned that same day that I almost drowned. And I'd never, ever experienced that before, because when I read that, I knew exactly what they were going through, except I had that second. I had that one extra second that they didn't have. And I was so grateful for that, and I'll be forever grateful the rest of my life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. And our next storyteller is Deanne. She's an artist, a writer, and a theater director, and also a traveler. And she will be telling a traveling story. Thank you. Welcome, Deanne. Oh, well, you can applause. A long applause.
Wow. When I was 22 years old, I just completed 3 years of a very intense training at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. I was exhausted and I needed a break. So I read about this island off the west coast of Ireland, very remote, sparsely populated, and I thought, great, this would be a great thing to do. So I took a boat to Dublin, the train across Ireland to Galway on the west coast. And early in the morning, I got the boat to Inishmore. It was a 3-hour journey, and it was the beginning of winter, so it was raining, and it was windy, and it was cold, and I was the only woman on the boat, and none of the men talked to me, and they didn't even look at me. They kept their eyes cast down. So I started to get a little concerned because I really knew nothing about the island. So we got to the port, and in the port, there were no restaurants, no hotels, one pub and one general store, and one street. So I went into the general store and I asked them, is there a room to rent? And they laughed. They said, well, you know, you could be knocking on the doors. And so I started to walk down the one street and I knocked on every door. And either they didn't open the door or else they shook their head no. So my concern mounted. I got to the last house, I knocked on the door, and a woman came, and she thought for a minute. She said, well, you know, I have to take the boat today, and I'll be gone a week. Would you like to take care of my brother? And I said, yeah, okay, yeah. So I took care of her brother. I cooked him breakfast and supper every day, and in between, I walked the island. It's 8 miles long and 1 mile wide. There's the beginning, which is the port, one pub, one general store. Halfway down the island, one pub, one general store, and at the very end of the island, 3 houses. And in between, a few houses dotting the way. So I knocked on every door, no, no, no. The day before the woman was to come back, I found this house that was tucked away off there was only one road that went down the whole island. And a woman answered the door, and she smiled at me. And I burst into tears. And she says, oh, love, you come in now and have a cup of tea and tell me everything. So I went in, and I told her, and she said, oh, don't be worried about that. It's the islanders. You know, they're superstitious. And, well, anything new makes them really scared. Now, you can stay here. I have a very nice room. So she asked me what I did. So I said I was a writer. Well, I mean, I was writing my journal every day. And she said, oh, that's a wonderful thing then. Because Brendan Behan wrote a Borsta Boy in that very room you're going to be staying in. Now, isn't that a really good thing? So the next day I moved in, but the best thing about this house was that her son had a dog. And it was a sheepdog, and his name was Fluff. And every day, the sheepdog and I walked the island. Fluff would chase rabbits, and I would sit against the stone walls. There were no trees on the island, only rock, and I would lean against the stone walls, and I'd write in my journal, and I'd make up songs. And on the east side of the island was a beach with flat, long seaweed, and on the west side of the island were 300-foot cliffs. And I would sit on the edge of the cliffs, and the waves would pound, and I would look out at the Atlantic, and there was no land anywhere in sight, and I would just feel these energies, and I was so excited and so afraid. And sometimes I would climb down the rocks, and they had a blowhole that was shaped like a bathtub. And the waves would come in, and then they get sucked out, and they come in and get sucked out. And one time I was down there at the blowhole, and a seal came out. And then it got sucked down. And then it came up again, and I went, hi, hey, hi. And he turned, and he looked at me, or she, in the eyes, and then disappeared. And that's what my life was like on that island. It was, I would go sit in these ruined castles, and there would be swarms of crows circling around me, cawing, and I'd look and stare into the slitted eyes of the goats. And Fluff would be at my feet trembling, and I would go in the little chapel, and it would rain, and then the sun would come out, and there would be rainbows, and it would rain, and it was misty, and it was cold. And so then one day, after about a month of being there, I just never, the people just weren't friendly. And, you know, I probably was a very strange anomaly. There were no tourists or anything on the island. So I made up this story that I was doing an article for National Geographic about the island. Well, then the next day, everybody wanted to talk to me. So that was great. So I started helping the farmers, you know, dig their turnips and their potatoes, and helping them milk their goats. And so then, this was about a month later, Morchin, the woman's son, Fluff's owner, came home. He had been fishing for a month, herring fishing. So Morchin and I got to be friends, and he took me to the pub. Well, I'd never gone to the pub because women didn't go to the pub. So here I was, the only woman in the pub, and someone was playing the Mudroom, and another one was playing the penny whistle, and they do 14 verses of Mary Hamilton, and I knew all the verses, and then we drink the Guinness that was like cream. It was so thick, which was the islanders' food. And then we go to the Cayley, and I dance from 11 at night until 2 in the morning without stopping, and it was just amazing. And the island, I fell in love with the island. I was so moved by the old people. They believed in fairies. I believed in the energies. I didn't know what it was, but I was really profoundly affected. So about 3 months go by. Morchin had to leave again on the boat for a week, and I'm walking the island with Fluff every day. And one morning, I'm in bed writing in my journal, and there's a knock on the door, and 3 women walk in and stand at the foot of my bed. And the oldest woman says, "You're to be leaving on the boat this very day." And I said, "Why?" "You're to be leaving on the boat this very day." And they left. So I went to the woman whose house I was staying in, and I asked her, and she said, "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to tell you, but, well, you see, the family, you know, Morchin, we own half of the island, and, well, those women want Morchin for their daughters." So I didn't leave that day, but I left soon after, and the women were, I realized that the women were right, that this wasn't my home. I didn't want to get married. I didn't want to stay there. Well, I did want to stay there, and I wanted to live there the rest of my life, but I knew I never would. So I cried on the boat, and I cried on the plane, and I got to New York to embark on my professional theater career. Here I was on another island, knocking on many more doors. And after a month, I get a letter from Morchin. and he said he had to shoot Fluff because Fluff had eaten the sheep, and that was the law of the island. And I've lived on many islands since that first one, but I am still deeply moved by Inishmore. Thank you.
And our last storyteller for the evening is Suzanne Schmidt, who is a woman of many talents and a repeat storyteller here. And she is also the regional producer for The Moth, which happens on the other side of Vermont in Burlington. So please welcome Suzanne Schmidt. Where are you?
So for 2 weeks every summer, my family and my best friend's family would take extreme camping vacations on the shores of Long Island. Now, camping back in the 1960s is nothing like it is today. My kids have this whisper-thin nylon tent. You can fold this thing up and put it in your pocket. It weighs 3 ounces, and it dries in an hour. We had government-issue military canvas. These things weighed 150 pounds apiece. They had 27 interlocking poles the size of a child's forearm that had to fit together exactly, or the thing would just collapse on you and suffocate you while you slept. The first day we bought this, it smelled like 100 sweaty soldiers had slept in this thing in some village off the coast of Italy. Last time we camped in it was 1971, and when I was home last month in New York, it's still drying in my mother's garage. We had 4 of those giant green double burner Coleman stoves that you had to thread that red bottle in at an exact 45-degree angle, pump it 21 times. If you pumped it 22, the thing just blew out and never worked again. Ours had little stickers on the top cover that said, "Tested on Mount Everest." And even at 7, I knew that the hardiest Sherpa with the strongest yak in the world was going to look at this thing and go, "No, that's not coming out of base camp." So 2 mothers, 2 fathers, and 6 children would load 4,000 pounds of camping gear into 2 little boats, and then we'd head out into the Nissequogue River through the Long Island Sound. It would take us an entire day to get to this remote peninsula. And then for the next 2 weeks, it was like Swiss Family Robinson meets Lord of the Flies. There were no rules at this area like there were at the designated camping areas. We'd rise and sleep whenever we wanted to. Not only would we not wait a half an hour after we ate to go back in the water, most days the mothers would just lob peanut butter sandwiches to us while we were swimming. These were the best 2 weeks of my life. At night, we would fall asleep in our smelly tents to the sound of our parents' laughter around the campfire. It was the sound of laughter that only came when you were with grown-ups that truly loved each other and were kind of drunk. The family that we camped with are 3rd-generation friends. Our grandmothers had met on the boat into Ellis Island. Our fathers were only sons that both lost their fathers very early in life. And my best friend to this day is the youngest daughter in this family. So the thing that we didn't quite know at the time was our remote peninsula was not that remote, because right around the corner was a bar. So every night on that trip, the fathers after dinner would say, "We're going to go blow the gas out of the lines." And they would hop in the boats and they would take off. And they'd come back an hour later really happy to see us. And so on this one particular night, the mothers look at the fathers and they say, "We are going to go blow the gas out of the lines, and you will be in charge of the children." All 6 of the children are still alive, by the way. And our fathers were great fathers, and they had been in charge of us individually on many occasions. But this was the first time the two of them had been in charge of us together. And like most fathers in the 60s, when you're in charge of your children, there's this little voice in your head right before something ridiculous happens that says, this could end badly, don't do it. But there was something that happened to my father and my Uncle Bill when they were together, and that sentence would change to the question, what's the worst that could happen? So the mothers go off to blow the gas out of the lines, and the fathers look at the children, and at this point we are dutifully lined up on the beach because we know something incredible is about to go down. And they look at us and they say, you will go get the wood. And we say, yes, fathers, we will, and we scamper off down the beach. And we come back with the kind of wood that children can find, which are tiny little twigs that burn in about 11 seconds, and giant water-soaked tree trunks that will never burn. And we throw these into the pit, and the fathers look at them, and the fathers say, this is great, because they don't want to shame and judge us. That's really the mother's territory, and they're going to just leave that for them. So my father goes to light the wood, and of course it won't light. And my brother says, why don't we throw some gas on it? And my father starts to say, I don't think that's a good, and my Uncle Bill says, that's a great idea. What's the worst that could happen? So we dump a couple of gallons of fuel onto the fire. My father lights a match, the children take a step back, he throws it in, nothing happens. And just as my brother is about to say, I think we need more, my father leans over the fire pit. And this explosion licks up to the heavens. There are flames 30 feet in the air. There's a mushroom cloud. You can see this from space. It blows my father 4 feet back on his ass and singes off his eyebrows. And my Uncle Bill runs over and goes, that was close. And my father is like, I know, right? And so the two of them compose themselves, and they look over to check on the children, who at this point are screaming, this is great! We love being with the fathers! Now, you couldn't exactly see this from space, but you could see it from the shores of Connecticut. Because the Bridgeport police call the Harbor Patrol, who dispatch every single Coast Guard boat in the Long Island Sound towards the peninsula. The other place you could see this blast was the bar where the mothers were blowing the gas out of the lines. So I look out on the horizon, and simultaneously the Coast Guard and the mothers are charging towards the beachhead. Look over at my father, and I said, I have always loved you. And I am going to miss you so much. The Coast Guard get to the beachhead, they set up a perimeter, the mothers break through. Instantly, we're banished to our smelly tents. We shuffle off. We love the fathers. Why do we even have mothers? They ruin everything. We can hear the negotiations from the tent. The Coast Guard agrees to let us spend the night if we promise that we will pack up, move to the designated camping area, and never return. The mothers agree not to kill the fathers in their sleep, and the fathers agree that the fatal flaw in their plan was allowing the children to collect the wood. So the next morning, 2 mothers, 2 fathers, and 6 children load 4,000 pounds of camping gear back into 2 boats, and we head to the designated camping area. And for the next 4 days of our vacation, we observe the quiet hours, we wait on the beach a half an hour after we eat until the lifeguard says we can go in. And at night, we sit around the tiniest of fires encased in a Coast Guard metal-approved ring, looking longingly at the fathers, thinking, will the mothers ever get desperate enough to give us a second time to be alone with you? The last time we were alone with the fathers was 2006. My uncle passed away after a very long struggle with lung cancer. And 7 weeks later, when my father died completely unexpectedly, the 6 children determined that his cause of death was likely a broken heart. And so we had my uncle cremated in Florida, where he had gone to live with my best friend. We had my dad cremated in Vermont, where he had come to live with me. And we brought their ashes back to Long Island. And we placed them together in a box. We doused it with lighter fluid. I know that sounds bad. We set them on fire. We sent them out into the Nissequogue River. We hadn't really accounted for the tide and the wind. And so as the flaming box of our fathers picked up speed and made its way past the Coast Guard station, they went to jump into their boats to investigate. And on the second pass, the wake swamped the box. And we watched on shore as they slowly sank down into the water. I swear I could hear my uncle say, "That was close." And my father say, "I know, right?" I know nobody could hear that. But if you were in a mile of the shoreline that day, you could definitely hear the 6 kids triumphantly screaming, "We love the fathers!" Thanks.
Thank you, Suzanne. And that was our last story for tonight, but we will have another evening of storytelling in June 14th. That's the date. The theme is The Longest Day, which actually it will be close to the longest day at that point. If you have a story about the longest day, please send us an email. This event will not happen if you do not send us your stories, and we truly want everybody's stories. You do not have to be a professional. You do not need to be experienced. You can be shy. I'm actually shy. I'm actually nervous standing up here. So you don't need to be courageous to come here. Just if you have a good story, please send us an email, and see you in June. Have a good evening.